When we use the word hallucination, we usually mean the perception of something that others cannot see or hear. You see a shape, a color, or a figure standing in the room, and to you it is as undeniable as the chair beneath you, yet if no one else can confirm it, we dismiss it as not real. And so this raises a question: what do we actually mean by real? If reality is only what can be shared by consensus, then dreams, private thoughts, and even pain would not qualify. After all, no one can directly verify the headache you feel, or the image that arises in your mind's eye. And yet, these experiences undeniably exist for you. So the very idea of hallucination forces us into a corner. Is it a falsehood, a trick, an error of the senses, or is it simply a different class of event in consciousness, real in its happening, even if not publicly accessible? No scientific authority has resolved this question with certainty, because at its root it is a question not of chemistry, but of the nature of experience itself. The difficulty is this: reality is not as simple as a show of hands. Consensus proves nothing about the essence of the experience itself. To the dreamer, the dream is utterly real until waking breaks the spell. In the same way, the hallucinatory vision is not a mere nothing, it is an event in consciousness. It has its own integrity, its own existence. So when we speak of hallucinations, we are not merely speaking of falsehoods or mistakes. We are brushing against the very mystery of perception, that the mind can project images, forms, and voices with the same force as the external world. And in that curious fact lies the first crack in our comfortable certainty about what is real and what is unreal. What tends to happen under the influence of a psychedelic substance is something quite extraordinary. You become aware of being aware. Normally, in everyday life, your attention is directed outward. You look at a tree and see its branches and leaves, but you do not notice your eyes. You hear the notes of a violin, but you do not notice your ears. When the senses are functioning smoothly, they remain invisible, transparent, unnoticed. It is only when something goes wrong, a ringing in the ear, or spots before the eyes, that you suddenly realize these organs are there, coloring your experience. Psychedelics magnify this effect. They shift the focus away from the object perceived and toward the process of perception itself. This is a remarkable turning point, because ordinarily we live under the assumption that perception is simply a window onto the external world. But once your vision alters, when colors shimmer, when forms breathe, when sound begins to carry texture, you cannot help but ask, what is it to see? What is it to hear? You become fascinated not only with the world you are perceiving, but with the act of perceiving itself. In that moment, the senses seem to fold back upon themselves. The eye looks at seeing, the ear listens to hearing. And this, you see, is the beginning of self-exploration. For when you notice awareness itself, you are turning inward toward the very root of experience. The psychedelic state, then, is not merely about seeing peculiar patterns or hearing unusual sounds. It is a gateway into self-knowledge because it compels you to examine the ground of consciousness. You become both subject and object, the observer watching the act of observation. And that simple shift is the seed of profound insight. Once this shift occurs, when attention turns upon perception itself, you begin to notice peculiar alterations in the way the world presents itself. They are not, strictly speaking, the invention of new objects. You don't suddenly conjure unicorns or castles in the air. Rather, ordinary things appear to transform in subtle but deeply curious ways. I recall an experiment in which I gazed at the mullions of a window. There weren't any more of them than usual, and I wasn't exactly seeing double. But the very sequence, one beside the other, suggested a doubling. It was as if the mind had woven an extra thread into the fabric of vision. When asked to hold up a finger to test for double sight, I counted just one, yet beside it drifted a wisp of cigarette smoke. That thin curl of smoke, aligning itself with the finger, created a ghostly twin. Was it there? In one sense, no. In another, entirely yes. This is the essence of psychedelic perception. The world becomes elastic, supple, alive. A wall may no longer seem fixed stone, but like a curtain stirred by an unseen breeze. A carpet's threads, stared into long enough, will wriggle as though each were a small creature waking from sleep. The world breathes, the familiar grows unfamiliar, and the unfamiliar strangely intimate. And yet, amid all this flux, you retain the sense that things are as they ought to be. The chair is still a chair, the room still the room. Nothing has vanished. Everything is simply off-shifted, intensified, vibrating with a life that was always there, but seldom noticed. These alterations provoke a question. If perception can be bent, stretched, made to shimmer, what is its true shape? What is the right way to see? As these alterations unfold, another discovery comes to light. The senses are not as separate as we have been taught to believe. Vision, hearing, touch, taste, smell. Under psychedelics, they begin to blend, to cross over, to reveal themselves as branches of one single root. This is why, in such states, people often report hearing colors or seeing sound. A note of music may glow with a certain hue. A flicker of light may ring with a tone. These are not fanciful metaphors. They are lived realities in that moment. And they make a curious kind of sense, for all the senses are variations of one fundamental capacity, sensitivity itself. They are refinements of the same basic power of touch. Think of it this way. To see is to be touched by light. To hear is to be touched by vibration. To taste and smell are to be touched by subtle chemical dances upon the tongue and nose. At their core, all senses are ways in which the world presses itself upon us and in which we, in turn, feel the world. Ordinarily, we keep these channels strictly compartmentalized. Vision is vision, sound is sound. But under the influence of psychedelics, those partitions grow porous, the senses reveal their kinship. You begin to realize that perception is not 5 separate streams, but a single river flowing in different currents. And once this is seen, the old divisions dissolve. You no longer ask whether you are seeing or hearing, but simply experiencing. The whole fabric of perception becomes a woven unity, shimmering with countless threads, yet arising from the same loom. It is a revelation both strange and obvious. All senses are one sense, divided only for convenience, reunited when the mind steps back into its original wholeness. One of the most intriguing inquiries in the psychedelic state is to ask yourself, what is the difference between this way of seeing and the ordinary way? Because everything on the surface still appears as it should. The chair is still a chair, the floor is still the floor, but somehow it is all slightly skewed. It is the same and yet not the same. You might say it is like putting on a pair of tinted glasses. At first, the whole world is colored by the lens. A green shade makes every object green. A red lens paints the entire landscape in crimson. But after a while, the mind adapts. It filters the distortion and restores a sense of balance so that the green or red no longer overwhelms you. The world begins to look normal again, even though you never remove the glasses. Now, imagine putting on a glass for every sense you possess: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. Each becomes colored, textured, flavored by an unseen filter. And the result is that everything appears funny, strange enough to remind you that you are not simply seeing the world, but seeing the act of seeing. This is what I call funny awareness. It is awareness that becomes fascinated with itself. Instead of being lost in what the eyes present or the ears deliver, you notice the miracle of perception itself. Your mind organizes patterns that, in the ordinary state, you would dismiss as accidents. Yet here they come alive, intentional, radiant. So the difference is not between real and unreal, but between forgetting awareness and rediscovering it. Psychedelics pull back the curtain. They show that perception is not passive reception. It is a creative act. From time to time, within the psychedelic state, there bursts forth an experience so overwhelming, so radiant, that words can scarcely contain it. It is as if, for a brief interval, you have placed your finger directly upon the very center of reality. The sensation is not merely visual or auditory, it is total. The whole universe seems to reveal itself as an indestructible energy, a colossal dance of forces weaving in and out, playing endlessly without beginning or end. And in the midst of this, there arises a shocking recognition. It is all you. And you had no idea. Now, that does not mean you are the only being in existence. Quite the opposite. It means that every center of life, every creature, every flame of consciousness is an expression of the same radiant core, millions upon millions of centers, yet all of them one. In this vision, you feel yourself as a kind of luminous center of light, joyous, expansive, roaring with laughter, vibrating with love. It is like a tremendous yes resounding through your whole being. For a few moments, everything glows with the unmistakable presence of the divine. A whooping, singing, glorious boom of energy that says, "This is it." And though the intensity does not last long, perhaps only minutes, the afterglow lingers. The world shines with a reflected glory. Trees shimmer, faces glow, every ordinary object hums with a subtle radiance. The vision fades, but its imprint remains. This luminous core is not something added to the world. It is the world seen clearly, without filters. The psychedelic simply rips away the veil, and for an instant, you stand face to face with the infinite energy that was always there, breathing through you and as you. As the luminous intensity subsides, there comes a gentle return to the ordinary state. At first, this can feel like a loss, as though something grand has slipped away. But if you look carefully, you realize that ordinary life itself has been revealed in a new light. Everyday consciousness is no longer taken for granted. It is seen as part of a larger rhythm, a cosmic game of hide and seek. The dazzling vision and the plain world are not separate realms, but two sides of the same coin. One implies the other. The extraordinary cannot exist without the ordinary, just as peaks require valleys. So the return is not a descent into dullness, it is an integration. You carry